Voters and the East Bay newspapers, good evening and welcome to our forum for Senate District 18 between incumbent William Billy CONLEY and challenger CYNTHIA MENDES. Democracy depends on educated voters, and the purpose of this forum is for candidates to answer questions that you have submitted and make an informed choice when you vote on September 8th. Although I remind you that you may vote early, and I'll discuss that later. This forum is being presented by the League of Women Voters and the East Bay newspapers. Scott Pickering, he's on the screen there, General Manager of the East Bay newspapers, is our moderator tonight. My name is Mary Chase, who represents the League, along with our comment tracker and mastermind of the forum, Susan Eschrich, timers Joanne DeVoe and Tom Padua. Ryan McCauley from the East Providence Library has generously volunteered his time to give us technical support. The League of Women Voters has been holding candidates forums at local, state, and national levels since women got the vote in 1920. The League never supports or opposes candidates. The League also holds voter registration drives. Members study issues important to their localities, state, and the nation, and reach consensus, and then advocate for positions developed by this process. We invite you to learn more about the League by visiting our website, the League of Women Voters, Rhode Island.org, which you will see on the screen momentarily. Consider joining us. In this time of COVID-19, we are debating a new territory on Zoom, and we're hoping that the technology will cooperate with the great help of Ryan. The moderator will be asking them questions which have been submitted in writing and which address issues that are important to these constituencies. Questions may be combined or paraphrased at the moderator's discretion. Each candidate will have the same amount of time to speak. Each gets an opening and closing statement and will be asked an equal number of questions. Each candidate also gets 4 additional chances, what we call wild cards, of 30 seconds each, that he or she can use to expand on any issue, bring up a new subject, or lengthen her or his closing statement. Timers and recorders will appear on screen to alert the candidates of their time remaining and to ensure that each gets equal time. And now I turn over the program to veteran moderator Scott Pickering of the East Bay newspapers. Scott?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I came in riding on a bell. So yes, I am a veteran moderator. This is the first time I've ever done this in a Zoom session. So hopefully this will go smoothly for all of us. If it doesn't, it's a learning experience for all of us. I won't repeat too many of the rules that have just been gone over, just to say that I'll do my best to, as you are speaking, if you're getting to the end of your allotted time, either kind of let you know that you're getting there and find out if you want to use your wild card, or if not, then sort of steer you to the end so you can wrap up what you were saying and move on to the next thing. But if you're in the middle of something and you just want to keep going and you want to use up some of your extra time, then I don't want to disrupt your flow. So you can kind of indicate that you want to keep going, and you should be free to do so. Each of you is going to be asked each of you will be asked 6 questions, and you have a chance to respond first to 6 of them and second to 6 of them. I'll let you know that I and the audience know that we have received a large number, a significant number of questions submitted from the public. And so I had a lot to choose from here. I'm trying to parse them out over different sort of topic areas so we can cover a lot. But to the audience, just please know that there's going to be 12 questions asked tonight, and I probably have 3 times that number to choose from. So if your question didn't get asked, I apologize, but I'm doing my best to represent as much of the topic areas that were submitted as I can. So we determined before beginning the session that CYNTHIA MENDES will be the first to go. So you'll have the first opening statement. This is the Senate District 18 Democratic primary debate. And we have Cynthia Mendes and William Conley. And we'll get started with the opening statements. Ms. Mendes.
My name is Cynthia Mendes, and I am a working mother who never intended to run for office. But I'm asking for your vote today because my community is fed up with politicians that do not represent us, a state house that does not listen to us, and policies that do not help us. I was raised to know the value of service. As a daughter of a minister, I grew up serving soup to those in need. And now with my daughter by my side, I still spend my weekends serving the most vulnerable among us. In my time as a healthcare worker, I saw the true cost of for-profit healthcare as families were forced to choose between their medical care and their mortgage. Rather than a state house filled with lawyers and lobbyists and career politicians, I dare for us to reimagine that leadership looks like those who know the sacrifice of actively serving their communities. So if you're ready for new leadership that listens to our needs and reflects our character, I ask you to stand with me and vote on September 8th.
Thank you. Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Scott, and good evening to everyone. I want to begin by thanking the League for sponsoring this debate. Democracy is always well served by a thoughtful, honest, and open discussion of issues that are important to the people we represent. We're living in a unique moment in history, public health crisis, reckoning of racial injustice, and devastating impact to our families and our businesses because of the pandemic. Despite that, I have never been inspired more in my life to represent and fight for the people of East Providence and Pawtucket. That's why I'm still in session as chairman of Senate Finance, sponsoring bills to put in place an eviction moratorium, bring relief to small businesses, and doing everything I can to help our schools reopen safely, consistent with what our educators, parents, and children need.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move to the question session. First question will go to Ms. Mendes. This is a tough opening question, and from the standpoint that it will be difficult to fit it all into 1 minute. And Mr. Conley into 30 seconds. But, so I'm just setting the stage that brevity is very key. So think quick and be brief. What 3 issues do you believe will be most important to be addressed in the legislature next year?
So talking to my community, it's really, really clear that 3 things that will impact and need to be addressed is affordable healthcare, universal healthcare. We need to talk about a living wage, and we need to talk about our environment. And actually those 3 things can work together in a way that we can provide jobs that provide a living wage for people, and we can offer an opportunity for people to thrive in our state. And so they're not separate issues, but they actually work in tandem. But yes, affordable healthcare, minimum wage, and our environment.
Thank you. Mr. Conley, 30 seconds.
Education, 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 healthcare, affordable, accessible, quality healthcare. And we really need to reach out to our working families and small businesses to get them through this incredible devastation that they're experiencing from this pandemic. And I'm already laying the groundwork as chairman of Senate Finance to address each and every one of those issues. And I'm going to have to stop talking about them for the moment because my 30 seconds has expired, but I'm sure we'll have an ample opportunity to talk about them as we go forward.
Well said. Okay. Mr. Conley, next question will begin with you. This is a long question, so bear with me and don't start the clock yet. And again, these are submitted questions. East Providence needs revenue to deal with the effects of COVID-19, to protect children's safety and health, to reopen schools, and to address the effects of unemployment. While new development would help keep taxes down, there are plenty of dilapidated properties throughout the city that could be redeveloped without destroying one of the most beautiful green areas left. Open space is important for people trying to social distance to maintain their health and sanity. And here's the question. Although it is not in your district, can you think of a sustainable way to preserve open spaces such as the Metacom Golf Course property?
Sure. That's been a core value of mine since I've been elected to the General Assembly and long before that. I have been a leader in environmental legislation, beginning with the sponsorship of the Resilient Rhode Island Act, which established the Climate Change Commission for the state of Rhode Island. I have sponsored and supported on more than one occasion bonds to create and preserve open spaces. And when we talk about having open spaces in our own backyard, yes, I realize how important that is. And I do support preserving as much as Metacomet as I can for open space. And there's a public process going on. I have confidence in that process. I have confidence in the public engagement, and I have confidence in our city council that will be able to accomplish that.
Ms. Mendes?
Yeah, right now, talking to neighbors who are working families that are crushed by the cost of just living and affording to live, revenue in the state is really important. And so it is literally insulting to a lot of people that large tax giveaways are given to developers where they don't have to pay taxes on their capital gains for 10 years, while working families have to take time after they work to march and ask that we don't pave our green space. So preserving green space and revenue is both possible, but we need legislators that will stand up and do both.
Thank you. Ms. Mendes, next question begins with you. Similar genre. East Providence has so many rundown buildings, empty houses, and empty storefronts. It looks blighted. How can we get those fixed up and either rented or sold?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because this is a top concern right now, especially in COVID, where we have small businesses that are just trying to stay open right now. And then we have entire strips that are overgrown. And we need to talk about ways that we can support small businesses. That does not look like giving large tax giveaways to large businesses. And so what it means is that in order to pay attention to that and make changes, it actually takes listening to our community. And it takes spending more time in our community rooms versus our corporate boardrooms. And the answers lie when you knock on doors and when you talk to people. The answers are right there, because working families know what it means and what it needs to revitalize our community. And it may look like grants and bonds, but it definitely doesn't look like giving tax giveaways to corporations.
Mr. Conley.
So that's why I introduced legislation known as a Small Business Development Fund. It encourages private capital investment by federally licensed companies in small businesses. I've been working with the Commerce Commission, and I'm proud to say that the Commerce Commission has approved $20 million of private investment, not state money, private investment in small businesses that's going to be made available in the coming weeks to small businesses throughout the state, and absolutely in East Providence and Pawtucket as well.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Mendes.
So one of the concerns that I heard actually by talking to voters was that my opponent had voted for a bill that would expedite foreclosure on properties, on vacant properties. That expediting of foreclosures actually means that people's properties would be taken from them when they're in nursing homes and other situations. When we're in a COVID, and this is before a COVID crisis. So I think it's really important that we have legislators that are willing to pause and stop and look out for, be bold enough to look out for the small businesses and local communities versus moving things along to get money back in the bank for the bankers.
Yes, Mr. Conley.
Actually, the opposite is quite true. I did not submit legislation to promote foreclosures. In fact, this past week, I submitted legislation to put in place an eviction moratorium, a foreclosure moratorium, and an eviction diversion program in the district court. My legislation does just the opposite of that. So frankly, who's ever saying that is mistaken.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Mr. Conley, we'll begin with you. Do you support the governor's green energy plan, and what legislation would you propose or have you proposed that would help support it?
Yeah. So I am very much a proponent of the governor's green energy plan. As I said a moment ago, I was the primary sponsor of Resilient Rhode Island, our climate change act that set up the Climate Change Council. In addition to that, after setting up the council, I proposed legislation which was passed, which required the council to do a carbon marketing study. When the council got back to me and said, we need funding for it, I was the one who wrestled $250,000 from the VW settlement to enable that study. And now that that study's been done, I'm now sponsoring legislation which will mandate a carbon emissions reduction for Rhode Island. In addition to that, I've been a strong supporter and primary sponsor of legislation for green energy, extending the green energy programs that we have beyond the termination date into, in fact, the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mendes.
Yeah, so I'm a mom of a teenager, and as we know, the climate crisis really does affect the next generation, and it is a top concern for them. One of the things that my daughter asks me is, why do our children and our teenagers need to march in the streets to ask for a bold, aggressive climate change? And that's because they're not seeing legislators that can agree to not take fossil fuel money and that can agree to do more aggressive plans regarding stopping our carbon emission by 2030 and stopping fossil fuel infrastructure.
Thank you. Next question, Ms. Mendes, goes to you first. We're going to move into the topic of education, which, as you both said, is important to you. This is a little bit longer question, but bear with me. Education is a key issue. During and after this pandemic, our schools and families will need your support more than ever. What is your vision for public education in our state? And what have you done in the past to be supportive of our public education institutions and their students?
Yeah, education is really near and dear to me. As someone who was actually still going to school before I started running for office, I believe learning is really, really important, and my daughter's in the public school system. But Rhode Island elected officials have refused to properly fund our schools. Our states provide deep, inadequate resources for our education, forcing some school districts to rely heavily on local property taxes. That puts the burden back on property owners and our working families. In addition to that, our state actually doesn't offer the promise to our children that they are guaranteed an equal and quality education. I want to be able to tell my daughter that as a legislator, I will guarantee that her and all of her friends are all deserving of equal and quality education in the state.
Mr. Conley.
I think that education is the absolute foundation for the future of Rhode Island. That's why, since I've been in the Senate, I have fought every year for additional funds for education. Since I've been in the Senate, for instance, East Providence has received about $10.9 million in additional funding. Pawtucket's received about $27.4 million. I've made sure that on top of that, we've added funding to, for our early learners and our other categoricals as well.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Mendes.
So my opponent has sponsored a bill that would exempt schools like Providence Country Day, which charges $40,000 a year for tuition, to be exempt from taxes, property taxes. And that is really, really difficult when East Providence is trying to scrap and put together enough money to build a high school. And so if we're going to talk about that, we need to talk about who we are looking out for. And public education should be our top priority, not giving property tax giveaways to, frankly, the people that should be investing in our community, because most of those students actually do not come from our community.
Yes, Mr. Conley, go right ahead.
2018, as chairman of Senate Finance, I led the fight for a $250 million bond for school construction in the state. I wanted East Providence to be first in line for that money. So I didn't wait for the passage of that bond. Simultaneously in 2018, I introduced and passed legislation for the bond for $189 million for our new high school. I completely support an additional bond.
I'm going to.
I apologize. I see the sign. I apologize. Thank you.
I'd like to, so I have some wild cards I can use as the moderator. I'd like to, in this instance, offer each of you one of those if you'd like to continue this topic. So Mr. Conley, if you'd like to continue for another 30 seconds, please do.
Sure. I think there are 4 really important guiding principles for funding. That's why I initiated and joined in a task force in the beginning of this session to look specifically at funding for our future. We adopted 4 guiding principles. All children should have access to a meaningful education, regardless of their residence, regardless of where they come from. The funding system should treat all taxpayers equitably.
Go ahead, use your own wild card.
The state needs to ensure, as we go forward with that funding formula, that it adequately reflects the different needs of students across the state, and particularly in Pawtucket and East Providence. And finally, it needs to provide a predictable and source of funding that school districts like Pawtucket and East Providence know they can rely on. And only when we essentially get a funding formula that is guided by those 4 principles and have, frankly, senators in places like the Senate Finance Committee who are going to fight for them every year and never let it go.
All right, thank you. Ms. Mendes, would you like to respond to any of that?
Absolutely, because education is near and dear to me. To remedy this problem, we must amend the Rhode Island Constitution that explicitly provides the right to a quality education to all children. I think that there's nothing more heartbreaking than when I drop my daughter off to school and I see teachers with Uber stickers and Lyft stickers on their windows of their car. I think funding education and funding our teachers is a primary responsibility of our state, and no parent should be worried about if they move to the next zip code that would change for their child.
Okay, thank you. I had several more questions related to funding formulas. I'm going to stay in this topic somewhat. One of the greatest predictors, I'm sorry, let me clarify. This question is going to Mr. Conley first. One of the greatest predictors of economic success is quality education. In order to promote equal opportunity for all, should the state revise its current education funding formula so that poor communities get more state funds? What would be the pros and cons of this idea?
So we do need to revise the funding formula. One of the problems with the funding formula now is that it doesn't take into account categoricals like our English language learners and our early childhood. So yes, it does. The funding formula needs to be designed based on students' needs. And those students' needs need to be met no matter what their zip code is. There's some recent discussion, for instance, that we're going to start looking at students being able to transfer among districts. When I talk to the parents in East Providence and Pawtucket, when I talk to the educators in East Providence and Pawtucket, they want a solution, and they are correct, that will provide proper funding for their communities. They don't want to send their students outside of their communities. And so, as I said before, we need to be guided by those principles that will do that.
Thank you. Ms. Mendes.
Yeah, so the pros, equity. That would be the pro, equity. And that would be something that I think people universally want and agree, actually I know that they would want and agree. I'm really actually sad to say that Rhode Island is one of the most segregated states in the country for education. Where our children of minority go to school and where our children of color go to school and children not of color go to school is very drastically different. And that is directly related to our inability to fund schools with equity. My opponent has been in office long enough to address this. I'm willing to stand up to the fight and take care of it.
Okay, we're going to switch topics a little bit. First, this question goes to you, Ms. Mendes, under the umbrella of gun safety. Can you discuss your position on gun control and measures you have taken or will take in the future to prevent gun violence?
So this is a subject that's actually really near and dear to me. A lot of people do know this. In November of 2019, I actually lost someone due to gun violence. I have friends who are proud gun owners, safe gun owners, and really fight for that right. And we've all had tough conversations about this. But I can tell you right now, the one conversation I would never want anyone to have is the one I had to have on the day of someone I loved pass. When I had to talk to a gun owner and have him cry in front of me on my shoulder and tell me I should have listened, that common sense gun laws is important, that he was wrong, and that he wants to have these conversations. Beneficial conversations around common sense gun laws is necessary, and we need people brave enough to do that. Not people that are listening to lobbyists, but they're willing to stand up and listen to the hurting people in our community that want to make sure that legislators are looking out for them.
Mr. Conley.
Common sense gun laws are incredibly important. I have supported essentially that legislation and co-sponsored legislation, no guns in schools, high capacity military weapons, high capacity magazines. They need to be banned. I've sponsored that legislation with other senators. I'll continue that fight. I've been a strong voice for common sense gun control since I took my seat in the legislature, and I'm not done fighting for it.
Okay, thank you both. Switching topics again. This question starts with you, Mr. Conley. Currently, Rhode Island law bans abortion coverage for state employees' health plans. While access to abortion is legal in Rhode Island, without insurance coverage, many women cannot afford their choices. Would you support ensuring that Medicaid and state insurance plans cover pregnancy terminations? Yes,
I do. In fact, I'm a primary sponsor of that bill in the Senate. The bill I sponsored does exactly that. And it was, we had a session that has been interrupted but continues. And that remains, that bill that I'm a primary sponsor on that does exactly that, remains a priority of mine, and I will continue to advocate for it in the Senate.
Ms. Mendes.
Yeah, a woman's choice is really important, but if you cannot afford your choice, you don't have a choice. And so there should never be a point where a woman is stuck choosing her autonomy or her ability to survive. So standing up for equality means standing up for women's choice and their autonomy, but it also means standing up for the ability to afford your choice. It's really important that we have someone that's championing for women. I've done that, been doing it my whole life, and I plan on doing it in the State House.
Okay, Ms. Mendes, this is not my question. I only say that because the way it's phrased. If this was, it says my 13-year-old daughter wants to know, and I'm thinking my 13-year-old would not be aware enough of the world and removed enough from their smartphone to ask this question, but this 13-year-old is in touch with the world around them. So my 13-year-old daughter wants to know what your take is on how to help the homeless community in your district.
Yeah. So working with those that are struggling with housing is near and dear to me. Actually, that's part of how I got into this race. I've volunteered and I've worked with the founder of the Friendship Breakfast and other organizations, and they were the ones that said, we need you in the State House. You need to run for office. That's actually why I'm here, because I'm unafraid to stand up for people that do not have a voice. And we need to address the housing crisis. We actually don't have a housing crisis nearly as much as we have a universal healthcare crisis, as we have a greed crisis in the fact that we cannot provide a living wage for people, and that we actually can offer people meaningful paths to decent work that provides them dignity. If we can provide dignity in healthcare and mental health care, if we can provide dignity in a living wage and being able to earn a living wage, if we can force municipalities, talk to municipalities about meeting their affordable healthcare criteria, which has not happened across the state, we can look out for them. But we need bold legislators that are willing to do that. My life has been given to service in that area, particularly. I look forward to doing that in the State House.
Mr. Conley.
The homelessness crisis is not a new one. I can remember when my 3 adult children and I first engaged with the Homeless Coalition in East Providence in support of their programs. I continue that fight today. I continue the fight to address homelessness through a bond for this session. I continue that fight with my eviction moratorium legislation, and I continue that fight by supporting a steady stream of income for that specific purpose in our budget.
Okay. Thank you. We charge you another wild card for going over there through the stop.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. The next question begins with you, Mr. Conley. On a similar topic having to do with housing, the Black Lives Matter movement has highlighted the fact that one of the greatest contributing factors to economic insecurity is policies that force people of color and low income to be concentrated in certain areas. How would you address the need for adequate, affordable housing throughout the state?
So, as I just said a moment ago, supporting a bond in this budget specifically designed to find a funding stream, set up a funding stream for affordable housing. But it needs to be supported by a steady stream of income on an annual basis as well. And so, in addition to the bond, I'm supporting and promoting and advocating for a bill which will create a steady stream of income just to do that, through a surcharge on the sale of real estate above $500,000. And the calculations on that show that it will be a significant support for affordable housing in Rhode Island. And we need to identify the most efficient ways to do that as well. Thank you.
Ms. Mendes.
So yes, affordable healthcare, as I've said, is really near and dear to me. More than 1/4 of our homeowners are cost burdened by housing, the cost of housing at record levels. And that was before the COVID crisis. I do recognize that my opponent has, provided legislation, but I will say something that my grandmother used to tell me, that delayed obedience is disobedience. We've been 6 months into this crisis, and to show up after taking a 4-month vacation from not showing up in legislation is unfathomable to me in the middle of a crisis.
Mr. Conley, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I wasn't on vacation. During that time period, I had over 10 finance committee hearings to get at these issues. Out of those discussions came that small business development fund and the work I did with Commerce that I mentioned a moment ago. Out of those discussions became the eviction and mortgage foreclosure moratorium legislation that I introduced. Out of those meetings, essentially the bonds for the economy are also fashioned. So I better stop. I don't want to use another wild card.
Yeah. Ms. Mendes, do you want to rebut or respond to any of that?
All right.
Okay. Our next question, and we have two more questions, just so you guys are aware, two left. Begins with you, Ms. Mendes. Do you have concerns that the new train station and new stadium in Pawtucket will create gentrification?
I have concerns, but more importantly, my future constituents have concerns. They have been very much left behind. I will have to say that knocking on doors in Pawtucket has been really eye-opening. They were surprised to have someone that was running for office actually willing to have face-to-face conversations about their concerns. And so their concerns is around gentrification and honestly being moved out of their community. They're worried about traffic. They're worried about the offer of low-wage jobs that will actually, we've proven that we're not willing to fight for a living wage. Our current legislation has proven they're not willing to fight for a living wage. So the dangling the offer of jobs in front of people at the expense of being able to afford where they live is really, really concerning to a lot of people in Pawtucket right now. So yeah, among other things, that is a big concern of theirs.
Mr. Conley?
Sure, and not only during the campaign, where I have been working on throughout the city, if I heard the concerns about gentrification in regard to the train station and in regard to the project in the Apex area of the city as well. I've been the sponsor, the co-sponsor of the $15 an hour minimum wage bill. And I am not going to allow that kind of development to result in gentrification.
Okay, thank you. This is our last question, which you just touched. The last one I was going to ask, you actually just touched on, so we'll sort of move along with it. Mr. Conley, you're first. Could you please address your stance as regards to the $15 minimum wage? Would this support an adequate standard of living? Please discuss the pros and cons.
So, as I said a moment ago, I'm a strong supporter. In fact, I'm a co-sponsor of the $15 minimum wage bill in the Senate. Now, that's not the one that passed on the floor. My version didn't pass. Another version passed. But I will continue to fight for that. And it's a minimum threshold. It's not designed to essentially support a family. It's a minimum threshold. We need to do more. We need to create good jobs. I think of myself, frankly, as a legislator who is a job creator. I have repeatedly sponsored bills that will create good paying jobs through the commerce programs, through Real Jobs Rhode Island. And so it's both. It's important that we get that $15 minimum wage. It's called the living wage. I think we need more.
Ms. Mendes.
Yeah, I think we've had time. I think we've had time to address that, and it hasn't been addressed. In addition to that, my opponent has had a record of voting against attaching increases to the capital price index, which means that people, when we do finally give them an increase in wage, have to come back again and beg for an increase, rather than making sure that future increases follow the cost of living. It is unfathomable to me that we have to ask people to beg for future increases. I'm a legislator that will be one of the first things that I address.
Yes, Mr. Conley.
Again, it's quite the opposite. I'm the primary sponsor of increasing the EITC from 15 to 20%. I am the primary sponsor to raise taxes on our top 1% earners, our top 1% income earners, from 5.99% to 8.99%. So frankly, it's quite the opposite of that portrayal. I've been the leading voice for equity when it comes to wages and jobs in the General Assembly.
Yes, Ms. Mendes, please.
Yeah, a lot of that work has started actually when I started to challenge Mr. Conley and I ran for office. To introduce a tax on our top 1% happened very, very recently. And that's really hard to understand how that can happen with the chair of finance committee who has found a way to give tax breaks through the opportunity zone for developers. But we're this far into 4 terms and we have yet to give people a living wage. It's unacceptable to me. And that is one of the first things I will address. We need people that are bold and that will not wait because families cannot afford to wait to be able to pay their bills.
Mr. Conley, you're out of wild cards, but I do have a couple more. Would you like to respond to any of
Yes,
that?
I would. Sure, I would. So that's not an accurate portrayal of my history. I started working on that bill with stakeholders, forming the necessary support for it long before this session started. We were able to put together a coalition of supporters in order to bring together and advocate for my bill to raise the taxes on the top 1%. My work on the minimum wage, my work on job creation goes back to my very first year in the Senate.
Ms. Mendes, anything else?
Yeah, and this is before Mr. Conley's time, but in 2006, we gave a huge tax giveaway to our top earners, and that resulted in the state losing over $6 billion in revenue. And in addition to that, rather than addressing that and knowing that our community members are burdened by their tax and their property taxes, we continue. My opponent has offered the opportunity zone and found ways to give people that do not need a tax break to get away with providing revenue to the service. Those tax breaks are unacceptable to me, especially when I hear the burden of people in our community.
I have one more 30-second wildcard to give you, Mr. Conley, so if you'd like it, please take it.
Frankly, that's the second time, so I have to respond to the misrepresentation about the opportunity zones. The process for opportunity zones begins with the federal government. That was federal legislation. The agency charged in the state of Rhode Island for applying for those opportunity zones for the cities and towns was the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation. It had nothing to do with legislation in the Rhode Island General Assembly. Anything to the contrary is simply not accurate.
Yes, Ms. Mendes.
Yeah, so it was a federal initiative. It was a Trump initiative. And so for me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to need legislators that are willing to stand up, that will not vote lockstep with the Senate president, that will not vote lockstep with our current president, and be able to stand up and boldly challenge legislations like that we know adversely impact our working families. I'm going to need to know that we have a bold leader, and I plan on being a bold leader, that will listen to the working families of our community rather than leaning an ear into corporate boardrooms.
Okay, thank you. Yes, through the timekeeper there, that was a moderator's wild card. So I think that concludes our dialogue, and thank you both for your energy. We're going to move to closing statements. Take a breath. We're going to move to closing statements, which are 30 seconds each. Ms. Mendes, you have a wild card unused, so yours can be a minute. Mr. Conley, you'll have the last word for 30 seconds. So, Ms. Mendes, the floor is yours.
First, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this, particularly in a time where it's really, really important that we preserve our democracy. So I want to thank you for doing that and providing this valuable opportunity, and for all of the voters that are spending this time in listening and engaging. I've had incredible conversations with the members of our community about things we value, like green space, decent jobs, and healthcare for all. We don't agree on everything, but the one thing that we do agree on is the status quo has failed. Leadership means standing up for the least among us. And doing that and doing the right thing, no matter what, is exactly what I plan to do when I become your next senator. So if you agree that it's time to have leaders that listen and that reflect our values, I respectfully ask for your vote on September 8th.
Thank you. Mr. Conley?
We've talked about a lot of important issues tonight. Education, healthcare, affordable housing, working families, small businesses, gun control. I have been a leading voice on every one of those issues in the Senate and in the General Assembly. Frankly, at this critical moment in history, I have never felt more inspired or the need to serve the people I represent than I have in my life. I ask for their vote so that I can continue to do that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you both. That concludes tonight's forum. I've never wrapped up a Zoom debate, so I don't know how to say goodbye to everyone, but well done by everyone. If someone from the league would like to help sign off.
Yes, thank you so much, Scott. As always, you are excellent at presenting the questions and being flexible. So I just would like to say that this recorded forum, and I thank our candidates for such interesting discussion. I think it was an excellent, we had some very excellent thoughts and ideas. The recorded forum will be available on August 28th, that's tomorrow, on the League of Women Voters website. I think you've seen it up, but this is one last time, with links to Facebook and YouTube. And I remind you that you don't have to wait until September 8th to vote. You can vote early in person now by mail, or by leaving your mail ballot in the lockbox at East Providence City Hall, 145 Taunton Avenue. Of course, you can also vote at your polling place on September 8th. In addition to great thanks to our two candidates, thank you again, Scott and Susan Eschrich and Joanne DeVoe, Tom Padua, and Ryan McCauley, sorry, Ryan. From the East Providence Library for our technical support. Be sure to cast your vote. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you again.
Good night, thank you.